So as I mentioned, we're going to be focusing on the parable of the unjust steward. There's a spiritual depth to it. In fact, if you listen carefully to this story, I suggest there's a moral code to this that he hits, and that's on the surface. And then you dig deeper and you say, well, wait, there's something going on that's even more profound. And almost, Jesus deals in irony. And it's evident in this story because he is telling you in a spiritual interpretation to be like an unjust manager of money. And that's what's so interesting about the Lord Jesus Christ. When you listen to what he's saying, there's always a gotcha. There's a gotcha in there. So let's look first at this story with this unjust steward, this manager of the money. And he's called in front of the rich man because he's been squandering the money. Who knows? He's been using it for himself, most likely, spending on trips to here or there, I suppose, or whatever they did back in those days for vacation time. And he's going to be fired, and he says, what am I going to do? So he goes out, and he cuts the debt of all the people who owe the rich man so that when he's kicked out, they'll bring him into his home and receive him. The word receive is very important here. And of course, the moral story behind this is if you cannot be reliable and trustworthy with the minor things of this world, which are all going to go away, how will God ever trust you with the things of the kingdom of heaven, the treasures of heaven? And we could apply it, of course, to our behavior in church, our behavior at our work, that God is always watching you. Did you know that? Not in a bad way, but he's saying, well, let's see what they're going to do with this situation. How are they going to serve me in this meeting with this person, or with how they spend their money, how they spend their time, their relationships with others? Are they showing loving their neighbor as themselves? These sorts of things. That's the moral agenda, and that's very straightforward. But then it comes this other thing about the spiritual interpretation. I tell you, make friends for yourselves with dishonest wealth. With dishonest wealth. In other words, everything in this life, money in this world is tainted somewhere. But Jesus is saying, regardless of that, make friends with this dishonest wealth. But there's more to it, and I am surprised really in the way that this is translated for you. It's translated it's kind of clunky, because really what this is saying is this. Look in that second paragraph. Jesus says, I tell you, make friends for yourselves with dishonest wealth. Well, Jesus in the original New Testament, in the Greek from which it comes, he uses an Aramaic term there. You ever heard of the term Mammon? Mammon of unrighteousness. He says, make friends with the mammon of unrighteousness. And that's very important, because if you look down at the very bottom of this reading, he says, you cannot serve both God and mammon. In other words, what people do with the money, the difficulty, the problem with the money is that mammon is being used, it's been personified almost like a god. And so the reason that people are holding on to their money and all these sorts of things, and this is that wealth thing that makes it difficult, is that the money becomes the reason for their existence. This is what Jesus is saying here. When he says, make friends with the mammon of unrighteousness so that when it fails, you'll be welcome into eternal dwellings, he's saying this. The rich man is God. And what God really wants you to do is take all the stuff of which you manage in your life, which is from God. Everything you have is from God. Would you agree with that? Okay. Everything you have is from God. So then what you do with it is how you serve God. And so use it joyfully and give it to people who are in need. Help other people out. And think about this. It's not just the money we're talking about here. We are talking about your time, your talents, your treasures, your interests, all these sorts of things. If you use these and pass them on to others who are in need, give of yourself, in other words, what happens is that when all of it fails, and it will all fail, in other words, when that's it, right? When that's it, when the lights go out for the last time, it says you'll be welcomed into these eternal places, eternal dwellings. But again, it's a little bit loose, it's a little bit weak here. Listen to what we could interpret this. We could actually write it this way. So that when it fails or runs out, they may welcome you to the eternal tabernacle or tent of God. Who are they? Who's welcoming you? All the people you helped. That's how you invest your life. Your life, your stewardship, what God has given you, what He's telling you here is you can't keep it for yourself. You have to use it. You have to give it, because if you don't give it away, what you're doing is, and you remember the other parable of the talents? What did the one guy do with the one talent? He buried it, but it's even worse here. If you're not just burying the gifts of God, you're using them only for yourself, for your benefit. If you're living for yourself, you're not going to be welcomed. But if you take everything you've got, all the gifts that God has given you, say, here, this is me for you. And it's not just, in fact, I like how the King James says it. It says, welcome into Mammon of unrighteousness, right? Make friends with the Mammon of righteousness so that when you fail, they will welcome you in eternal dwellings. That's the calling of the church. That's why we give designated offerings. That's why we give so much to help other people. It's because what we are trying to do is make friends of the mammon of unrighteousness so that when we fail, when this is it, they're going to be there to welcome us into heaven. How cool is that, that this is your ministry? Your ministry is to bring God to people in need. Your ministry is to love your neighbor as yourself. Your ministry is to give your all. In fact, I would suggest to you this. Look at in the second reading today. It's at the top of 2:15. For there is one God, there is also one mediator between God and man, the man Jesus Christ, who gave himself as ransom for all. He gave it all. Everything he possessed, he gave away. In fact, finally, he gave away his clothes, because that was all that was left. He gave away his cloak. He went up on the cross and died. By giving everything out, everything of his life, he will welcome us into eternal kingdom, into the eternal tabernacle of heaven.